Okay, excellent. Right, well, you're very welcome. This is my first ever LinkedIn Live. And as you saw from the graphic with the advertising the event, the question is your dream as a business leader big enough? And the question was sparked by Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. I watched it recently. It was one of those things that just popped up randomly on my YouTube feed. And it's a powerful speech, but I didn't realize initially that there was a lot more behind the scenes. And given that my work is about communication, negotiation, and presence, I decided to dig. And the speech happened at the March on Washington, as it's known, the March for Jobs and Freedom, happened on the 28th of August, 1963. And what we know about it, what we're popularly told about it, is that the I Have a Dream speech was the big event on the day. That's really what has come through in history. But the speech itself was only about 5 minutes of a 17-minute speech. And it almost, the I Have a Dream part almost didn't happen. So when I learned that, I was fascinated. And as I said, I had to dig deeper. And the march almost didn't happen. The whole event almost didn't happen. It was a very fraught time in American society. 1963, many people were still living in abject poverty. Segregation was still very much alive. There was at that stage, no civil rights legislation in place. It was only 3 years earlier that the American Marine Corps had desegregated. So tensions were still running rife around the whole issue of civil rights, both within white society and Black society. There was a nonviolent approach, which Martin Luther King had been persuaded to adopt. It wasn't initially his approach. And there was a violent approach led by others. And then amongst the white community, there were those who were very much opposed to civil rights and jobs and voting rights for Blacks. So the more I delved, the more I was fascinated by the whole approach around the negotiation and communication. JFK was president at the time, and he was moving towards bringing through civil rights legislation, but it hadn't happened. He was still negotiating with both his own party and others to persuade them that this was not just necessary on a moral level, but it was necessary on a practical level. But he was still meeting a lot of opposition. So the organizers of the march were actually a coalition. They had to bring together an umbrella group of 6 organizations, which represented many others, and they had to negotiate amongst themselves to agree on what the march would be, when it would be. And it was a very symbolic date because it was the centenary of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Address, which was supposedly to free slaves and give rights to Black Americans. That's a whole other story, but the date was symbolic. We have one more, just submitting Barbara. And the negotiations among the organizers were in themselves fraught. There were people from very diverse political, religious, economic, and social backgrounds, but eventually they agreed on a basic framework. When it came to the date itself, the march itself, there was intense negotiation over a sustained period with the Kennedy administration. And the Kennedy administration had great fears around it. They feared that if they were seen to support it, it would dilute support for their proposed legislation. They were also very fearful of violence by those attending the march and violence by those opposed to it. They were also fearful that if the march happened, maybe not enough people would come to actually support the process. And we didn't know it at the time, but Kahneman and Tversky, with their prospect theory, one aspect of that has demonstrated that when it comes to taking a risk in a negotiation of whatever kind, we are risk averse. We are most likely to be governed by fear of loss. In the published research, they say the fear of loss is sort of a ratio of 2 to 1, but in their actual research, they measured it at 5 to 1. So we're 5 times more likely to choose the less risky approach than to actually jump forward and take the risk. So when it comes to negotiation, it's feelings that tend to dominate. And we're all negotiating, whether we realize it or not. We're all negotiating daily. And when it comes to business and being a business owner, being a business leader, there are inevitably negotiations which are going to be much more challenging, not just in terms of the logistics and the practicalities, but the emotions. Because for a business to grow, we have to step beyond our comfort zone. We have to deal with the emotions entailed. And if we don't, business just doesn't grow the way we would ideally like it to. We may have the dream, but are we willing to take the step forward into the feelings, deal with the feelings, and take the actions that transform where we're at into where we would like to be? That's obviously an area I'm working with. But to go into the communication side then, going back to 1963, there was obviously no internet. Most people then didn't even have phones. So to organize a national meeting in a country the size of the United States was a massive undertaking. To actually bring together any significant number of people to organize the transport. And they didn't just have to organize the transport to get people to Washington, D.C. They had to agree that the people they brought would leave Washington, D.C. after the march. And with all their communication skills and their negotiation skills, they organized the people, they organized the local organizations, the local chapters, they organized the transport, they organized the toilets, because there had to be public toilets brought in for the number of people all along the mall in Washington. They had to advise people to only bring packed lunches because there were no fast food outlets, there were no restaurants available. Everything was closed to make sure there would be no disruption to business other than the closure, no violence, no alcohol available. And what happened was 250,000 people came to the march, people of all colors, not just black. And that was in a city of 800,000 people. Washington, D.C. then only had a population of 800,000. So the potential for disruption and violence was obviously massive. You can understand why the authorities were very fearful indeed. So the negotiation and the communication skills that created that opportunity, and that happened behind the scenes to ensure things happened and then happened peacefully, were incredible. You can imagine how fraught the emotions were on the part of the organizers as well as the administration. It's quite an astonishing achievement, it's quite an astonishing undertaking. But when it comes to the speech, and as I say, the speech is what we remember, the speech almost didn't happen. The organizing committee, there were 10 speakers on the day. Martin Luther King was the final one. And the organizing committee had to agree on the content of each speech to ensure that they wouldn't cause political upset and political outrage. And when Martin Luther King presented his speech to the committee, they went through it, and it was agreed that the "I have a dream" part was actually trite, wasn't relevant. It should be discarded. So, organization committee is not always the best thing, but that's what happened. So, Martin Luther King, 10th speaker, and this was also after musical performances. Crowd were tired. It was a long day. Giving the speech, reading on his notes. And at different points in the speech, there's applause. But it was only when Mahalia Jackson, a famous gospel singer, she had sung at the event prior to King's speech. She called out to him, "Tell them about the speech, tell them about the dream." And then he started to speak about the dream. And this is I'm just going to share the screen here for a moment. Just going to share the very beginning of his speech.
I can't hear it, Joseph.
Yeah. Oh, so just a moment. Just a moment.
You need to share audio.
Sound. Yeah, just okay. Let me go again.
I still have a dream.
Can you hear now?
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of...
I deliberately cut it short because it's 5 minutes something, but it's only 5 minutes something out of 17 minutes. And it's the only bit we know about. The "I have a dream." The rest of it was largely discounted. The bit that we remember is the bit that wasn't supposed to happen. And the bit that happened, the bit that we remember, the bit that's still influencing people today, only happened because somebody spoke up. Somebody assumed leadership. Mahalia Jackson spoke. She disrupted the proceedings. She took leadership. She influenced history. Most people don't know that she was even there. But she used quiet leadership. She used influence. She used her quality of presence to communicate directly, clearly, and firmly enough to influence Dr. King and to ensure that he actually spoke and brought his presence to the event in a way that we now remember 50 years later. It's the dream bit we remember. So, going back to the original question, as a business leader, Is your dream big enough? Are you willing? See a shake of head there. Are we willing to step up? Are we willing to step up into our own lives? Are we willing to be fully present? And so much of our communication is actually nonverbal. So much of how we present ourselves, how our communication registers with other people is nonverbal. It's our presence that registers first. We frequently hear the importance, how important it is to have trust in our business relationships. Many of us are familiar with the phrase know, like, and trust. But what we tend to do is we tend to look to get to know people, to build like, to build trust. But actually trust comes first. When we meet somebody first, whether it's on screen or in real life, in person, we instinctively have a feeling we can trust this person or we can't. Now, we will frequently second guess ourselves, but the first thing that registers is trust. We are hardwired to pick up on these things. As humans, we have only had verbal language for somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 years. That's a relatively short span in terms of our actual history as a species. Prior to that, our ancestors communicated with gesture, body language, facial expression, and they had to be able to read each other, and particularly to read the intentions and the meaning and the personality of strangers very, very quickly. They had to know whether somebody was likely to be a threat or a friend. And they survived because they did that, because they knew how to read the signs. This is still part of our DNA. It's hardwired into us, even though we don't necessarily realize it. So when we are running our own businesses, it's a massive advantage to us to be able to read other people, to read where they're really coming from, and to be able to do so quickly. To be able to read their personality, their communication style, their behavior style, but also to be able to read what's actually happening in real time in the room, whether it's a physical room or a virtual room. It makes a big, big difference, because we can overthink situations, we can over-prepare, we can overanalyze, and we can talk ourselves out of gains that might otherwise have been very, very apparent and very present for us. So part of the non-communication bit, the communication bit, so much of it is non-verbal. The general consensus is that at least 2/3 of our communication is non-verbal. So when we combine the verbal and the non-verbal, when we use our voice to get our message across clearly, but we also learn to listen to not just what other people are saying, but how they're saying it. We can hear also what they're not saying. We can listen for changes in pitch, changes in tone, changes in rhythm. Whether people speak more slowly, more deliberately, or whether people speak faster, or speedy. And if there's a change in pitch, change in tone like that, and particularly if they become faster, it tells us there's a hot spot. It may not be a red flag in terms of any kind of misdirection or deception, but it tells us something has changed in how they perceive things, what's actually happening right now. There's a stress point for them. Whereas if people start to slow down, it's indicative that they're either overthinking or they're withdrawing. They're no longer really engaged in the process. So paying attention to the communication aspect, stepping up into being really present, not just in our preparation, but in how we actually show up. Are we willing to show up as leaders in our own right, as business owners? Can be a huge determinant of the level of success we achieve. That we're not making excuses, we're not making apologies for being as we are, for being who we are. How other people respond to us is so often determined not just by what they think, but how they perceive our presence, how they perceive our communication style, not just the details of any given proposal. This is normally the part where it's about plugging services. Now, all of you on screen here know me well. Obviously, I am promoting a course and there's a mastermind to follow. I'm deliberately not going to go into the details of it here. You all know me. I'd rather just open the floor to questions or comments. So feel free to unmute yourself. If you have any thoughts, comments, feedback, questions, whatever, just feel free to fire away.
Really resonate with all of this, Joseph. Yeah, I know you and I, we've had a one-to-one, and so you got to know a bit more. But you know, it's really interesting in the fact that I, you know, my time as doing the role that I'm in now has been relatively short, and I've spent quite a lot of that time questioning myself, not believing in myself, and all this kind of stuff, and not necessarily having the confidence, or you know, to step into that circle of excellence that I know that I can be in. And the funny part of it is what you said at the end, is that when I because we're not always all in flow all of the time, right? We have good times, good days, bad days, and all that kind of stuff. But it's really fascinating that when I've seemed to have mentally got my ducks in a row, the clients come. When I haven't, they don't. So all that stuff about people feeling energies and like the perception of how you project yourself. I mean, this is something that absolutely fascinates me and has fascinated me for some time. And that if you can actually find that confidence and craft or recognize and learn how to recognize when those moments are there and how to sort of almost bottle it, right? It's a really good step forward. So I think what I'm saying is that the last 20 minutes, half an hour, etc., that you've been talking has been really saying very clearly what I've been thinking for a long time, and actually possibly a nice little flick in the right direction to do something about it, to do more about it than I already am. So thank you.
Well, thank you. You're very welcome indeed, and thank you for that, Fanny. And it's really about, we know our business. We know our skills, our tools, etc. We know that. We don't actually doubt the knowledge bit or the skills bit. So it's really a case of when we're presenting, and whether it's a one-to-one conversation, whether it's a presentation to a group of people, it's partly just relaxing into that. It's partly just allowing ourselves to breathe. It's partly greeting people with a smile. And there's every reason to open a meeting with a smile, because it tells people we're not a threat. It tells people that we are somebody they can engage with. And it triggers whether there are actually mirror neurons, or because I know there's some dissent among neuroscientists about it, but the general consensus seems to be that there are mirror neurons, which are particularly present in the heart. And when we smile at people, it triggers an inner response in them. They may not smile externally, but it triggers an inner smile, that they can relax, that they're not being threatened. So simple things like that can make a huge difference in opening the communication and opening the conversation. Barbara, you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I thank you for this meeting, because it's always so interesting to be part of it. And I would like to underline how much now this could be helpful for anybody, especially for a professional, because, you know, according to the development of automatic intelligence systems, the personal contact is something that we have. Is something that we can, that can help us to be different from the automatic intelligence. This was just my contribution.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, and no matter how far AI goes in whatever form, and the genie is out of the bottle now, we can't put it back in, there is nobody to put it back in, we will still be dealing with people, and we will still be dependent on creating successful relationships with people. And the level of success we achieve in those relationships is dependent on us showing up to the very best of our ability. And as you say, Fanny, we're not always going to be in flow. We're not always going to be, you know, all bubbly and happy and all of that. But even when we're not, it's still to show up in the best way we can at the time, and to trust that that is good enough. Again, not to downplay our abilities, our qualities as human beings, because that's an essential part of what makes us as business owners as well. Because again, you know, the old saying that people buy from people. So certainly what I'm experiencing more and more, and I suspect it's the same with each of you, is when we're engaging with people now, and it doesn't matter what their nationality is, where they are in the globe, more and more people, and at all levels of business, want to meet people who are showing up and being real, who are not pretending to be something that they're not. And it's okay to be a little bit uncertain, to be a little bit indecisive, to say, I'm not 100% today. It's okay to just acknowledge that and still show up with the best we have to offer at the time. And to trust that allied to our skills and the value and the benefits of our services is enough on the day. And then to learn, no matter how the experience goes, whether it's as successful as we would like, or in some cases more successful than we'd envisaged, or maybe it didn't go so well, to learn from the experience. What can I do better next time? There's a piece in the chat there from Paul, and we're drawn to the brokenness of each other. We recognize that in each other, that we're all wounded to some degree. And when we don't try to hide it, people pick up on that. Oh, they're real. This is a real person. It's not somebody pretending to be anything. So that's part of leadership. That's part of presence. Presence is not just about showing up and being all glowing and shiny and looking wonderful. It's about being real. It's as simple as that. Given that I will be posting it, I'll just share the information about what's coming up. I do have a 7-week course coming up starting on the 18th of April, Tuesday, 18th of April. It's 7 p.m. to 8:30 Irish UK time. That's 8 p.m. to 9:30 Central European time. And I know there are various other time zones around the world. I think it's 2 p.m. to 3:30 Eastern time and 11 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific time. So I think I've got those right. So it's a 7-week course. Aside from the actual course content, where we'll be exploring reading each other, faces, body language, gestures, paying attention to the voice, what the voice communicates, what's missing when people are speaking, the art of listening, the skills of listening. We'll be looking at detecting deception, which is in itself a massive topic, and various other topics included. And for attendees, there's also there's a bonus of a 1-hour recorded profiling session with me, where I'll profile either the attendee themselves, or if they want me to profile somebody else from some other area of their life. It could be It could be a business prospect, a client, and I can simply use a good facial photo of the person. So that will be a recorded bonus session for attendees, 1 hour session. And then after that course, I will be starting my own mastermind, again under the same heading of communication, negotiation, presence, where obviously we'll be exploring all of those topics in greater depth. That'll be a weekly mastermind. Again, it'll be Tuesdays. So if anybody has any further comments or questions, you're very welcome to share them. If not, I just thank you so much for your presence, your communication, verbal and non-verbal. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing, and look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you to you, Joseph.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.